Hello, my name is Chris Blask. I'm the Vice President of Strategy with Cybeats. And welcome to the 56th episode of Cybeats Powerhouse Perspectives. And with us today is the great JC Vega. JC, how are you?
Doing fantastic, Chris. Glad to be here.
Glad to see you too. It's glad to see you out here in the boats too recently. It's special. JC is another Southern Florida fellow, and like like everybody, yeah, JC, right? You host a call every week, with industry folks, the Weed Ram, that's been going on like 3.5 years. And we've done, yeah, Anthony and I have done 56 of these episodes with folks that show up on your call, right? And it's an interestingly circular little world these days, right? Mark Weatherford, just yesterday I got on a call and Mark's there, and I had a call with Mark in the afternoon. It's like this nature of things, right? And as I said, talking about this show, this is about transparency and so on and so forth. And you and I have talked about a lot about human transparency, right? You need to know the people, you need to make the contacts and build the connections. So maybe instead of technology, you know, we can play the parts of this conversation down that path, right? So back in
Sure.
the early, Anthony, put that first one up there. So as an Army guy, right, Army versus Navy, right? So we'll have fun with that in our three questions today. But looking back in your early career, when you first start, young person getting into all this, was it a simpler world? Was it easier to understand what's going on around you, um, in whatever level?
In a sense, it was because you don't know what you don't know. And we didn't know a lot about cybersecurity. In fact, when I got into security, it was when I was a teenager. I was into security, more physical security, law enforcement, things like that. And then I got into technology because technology started to happen around me. And I remember in college, my I wouldn't say my first computer class, but one of my computer classes was how to uh, use word processors on Mac computers. So what was new? Word processing was new, and Mac computers were new. And it was actually an English class and a computer science class in one, of learning the fundamentals of hotkeys and things like that on a Mac versus DOS, which DOS owned the market at that point. It was even before Windows. So uh, you didn't know what you didn't know. So everything was new knowledge, and you were exploring it with everyone around you and learning it. To this day, that is still the case, is that there are new terms, new concepts coming up, and you're looking at your references of how do how does this apply to me based on my experience, my knowledge, what I know, what the people around me know, and how do I bounce these ideas off of them? So, in the sense, it was easier because you don't know what you don't know, but that is really still the case. And none of us know it all. But the important part is knowing those who do, and having access to them.
As I Anthony, put the second one up. Let's talk the present day, right? Because I think that's a great lead into where we are, right? There's a great deal of angst today, but yeah, in my experience, there's always a great deal of angst. We just forget the angst we used to have, 10 and 20 and 30 and so forth years
You
ago.
want me to answer that question on the banner? Because I will.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, answer the question. Let's hear that one first. Yeah.
All right. So, big rivalry: Army football versus Navy football. And is it easier to beat Navy? Well, it's the United States Military Academy versus the United States Naval Academy. I did not attend the academy. My son graduated from there, but I did do 30 years in the military. But I taught there. One of the co-founders of the Army Cyber Institute, and did a lot in really jumpstarting cybersecurity in the Army and the Department of Defense, and bridging the public-private partnerships between the discipline. Now, I said I started back in the late 80s. This is now 30 something years later that we're doing this. And when I got to West Point, we were on a losing streak of 14 games in a row. And the first bowl game for all intents and purposes between Army and Navy, we actually won the game. And I was actually one of the mentors on the football team, helping them to understand computer science and the discipline. And because they're students, these aren't active duty people, these are students, college students going. And at one of the wins, I even got my own football. So there you go.
Oh yeah, Carlos.
So the idea of, was it easier to beat them? I don't know. When I got there, we started winning.
I love that. I love it.
You tell me.
Well, I can't help thinking that there is some cause and effect there, right? It's I'm not a sports person. My wife Donna, she's the sports person. Take me to my first sporting events of each time, multiple which I fell asleep in. But right, I do appreciate. Sports is different now than it was then. And again, because of the intelligence, it's not just bumping heads anymore. You really need to understand tactics and strategy and knowledge and information.
And it's the interconnectedness of that. They're not independent variables. They all depend on one another. And in the early days of sport, say pickleball, a few years ago, a lot of people could have been the national champion. I say pickleball because we're in Florida. People play pickleball. And it's, the fastest growing sport out there. Now, though, that a lot of people are playing it, your game has to come up. And it's because of the competition that is bringing up the quality of play. And that goes back to cybersecurity. I said, when we started, all of us were cybersecurity guys just because we did something that nobody else was doing, because there weren't a lot of people doing it and there weren't enough of people like us doing it. So we were the resident cybersecurity person. Now, since reaching certain positions and developing entire infrastructures of security, both technical and organizational, I always told people when we were starting that the person replacing you is going to be better than you. Just know that, because they have more knowledge, skill, and ability than you had when you started. And recognizing that it's not a competition, it's setting that benchmark as high as you can so that they can exceed it, so it could advance the discipline. And that's kind of a realization of where you are in this process of developing the discipline. And that's the part you have to really look at your organization. To your original question, you don't know what you don't know, but you can set the conditions on what has to be known, where the gaps are for the future. Even if you don't know exactly what that is, you can illuminate some of the parts you do know and not leave that as the blind spot for the next person coming in or the next generation.
Well, let's take this as we're talking about the green room. In this series, we don't always get into the software bill of materials and supply chain and so forth. People who know Cybeats know that that's what we're about. But we believe in transparency, and that I believe it. Fundamentally, right? And I think everything you're saying leads us in that direction. And Anthony, if you want to roll the last question, so we'll talk the present and the future, right? And I will see this question with my bias, right? I think the world is very complicated. However, as you said in your first answer, we didn't know what we didn't know in the past. And sports is a good analogy for this because, there are 100-year-old people alive today. When they were born, there kind of weren't organized sports, not like we know them today. And they didn't exist, right? The Super Bowl is my age. Every year there's a Super Bowl, whatever year it is, that's how old I am, right? Whatever number it is. And it's hard, I think, for people to understand that these complex things take a long time. Maybe longer than some of us last, and that's fine. But I think that we're in a space now, and our cybersecurity, just talking, right to the meat of it. This supply chain stuff that's been going on the last couple of years, the threat intelligence that came before it. Your time in the Army, I'm sure you were involved in some of that, getting cyber threat intelligence moving. While I was in the private sector at the same time doing certain things. We're kind of at a point now where we're really just beginning to put that together to some advantage. And in the future, it looks like we have to be driven to really get value out of that. We're probably not even seeing now. So I don't know why I phrase that. It's a question in a useful way, but you see what I'm saying there? What do you think?
Well, the evolution of this. So using the Levitt diamond, you think there's four parts of that diamond. One of them is the processes. If you impact the process of a system, then you're going to impact the other three corners. So you got the process, the technology, the organizational structure, and you have the people. As you look at that, we have gone through a significant evolution in the last 30 years. We've developed the people. We have more skills now than we did 30 years ago, more opportunities to learn those skills than we did 30 years ago. I remember the first wireless class I ever took. I had to teach it to myself with other grad students because there was no course on wireless. And so we were on standard 802.11 A and B. That was it. That's all that existed at the time. And so we had to teach it to ourselves. But the technology is also advanced. We've talked about the process is often ignored as the organizational structure, but that has also evolved. We now have CISOs. We didn't have CISOs or a concept of CISOs before. We now have BISOs. We now have cybersecurity evangelists. We have a whole discipline of cybersecurity that the job itself didn't exist yesterday, and it does today. And the question is kind of from before to where we are today, the evolution of sports, the evolution of cybersecurity is, well, you were a superstar back then based on what you knew. Would you be with that same knowledge a superstar today? And to the Army question here, we have Heisman Trophy winner here, Pete Dawkins. There we go. Pete Dawkins, given his skill in I think it was the 50s or 40s, would he be a Heisman Trophy contender today, given the environment? I would argue no, because the athletes are so specialized now that just being a good athlete isn't enough anymore. You look at these players, they're wicked smart. These aren't just meatheads out there playing the game. They are evaluating defenses, offenses. They know exactly where to be at a particular play, and that ball is going to be at that exact spot, and then being able to adjust from that and anticipate the defense, anticipate the offense, and know that you got to break left, break right. And it determines who the superstars are. But we can't get away from the fundamentals. Is you still have to know the fundamentals. So to where we were as individuals and where we are now, a lot of the basics, and I say that with a little reservation because we argue what the basics are still the basics. But now there's so much to learn that you're no longer a generalist. You got to be a specialist in an aspect of security the more senior you get. And then when you get to a certain point, you become the generalist again. But your rise through it, like in sport, is a position player. First, you go out there and you learn the sport and you find out, you know what, I'm better at offense, I'm better at defense, I'm better at these things. And then you realize I need to specialize. And then you earn your reputation, you earn your chops. And as you get more senior, you start managing and overseeing some of these bigger things. And so it's kind of like a nuclear bomb, the mushroom that forms and comes out. And we got to recognize that as the people part of it and the process part of it and the organization part of it. You can't necessarily stay in that siloed position as a senior person. You can as a technician, but not necessarily if you're going to be managing, leading, and large organizations. So we have to evolve the discipline. But like I said, when we started, that whole top didn't even exist. Much of the middle didn't even exist. Firewalls didn't even exist. The term firewall didn't even exist. So you're a firewall manager before there was a firewall. So anyway, that's just my take on that.
But that's as I say, we make the questions sort of jokey, casual and so forth. But I'm really happy with where that went, because I think that does sort of speak to the future, and as a business, or operating some infrastructure, you have a role in government or military or whatnot, related to all these things. You can imagine the failure states. But where I come with my inevitability curve sort of view of things is that if that's true, then there's your evolutionary crux. Because unless there is no future, somebody will find a way to avoid that and to get past that. And I think in your analogy, in sports, literally in sports and in business and sort of in life as individuals, we've narrowed that down. We built up a lot of structures, and you're doing those things for sure, or you wouldn't be here. You are, as a business, descended from the companies that didn't miss that 20 or 30, that bought a firewall 30 years ago, right? And now
No,
you're building on top.
absolutely. But we still have challenges. That's one thing about our discipline. It's still undefined. Football is, pretty well defined, but then you're getting kickers who are consistently kicking a ball over 50 yards in all conditions. A few years ago, that was an exception. Now it's a standard. And so they're getting better at what they're doing. The challenge we have, and it goes back to the fundamentals that I mentioned earlier, right, where I said it kind of the basics, but with some reservations. We haven't defined the fundamentals of cybersecurity. Perhaps we have of computer science, perhaps we have of IT, but not necessarily cybersecurity. And that's a challenge, because I just kind of said, it's like a nuclear bomb. It kind of, you see it lift the ground, and then you see it form in this silo where everything is getting sucked up and out, and then it comes out like that. The challenge we have is that initial blast is not clearly defined, and we have myriad ways or perspectives and opinions on that. And that's impacting the discipline, because we don't have that nailed.
Well, I've been triggered. I have to say this out loud, because CIA, if you're out there, you're listening to this, and you say, well, confidentiality, integrity, and availability are the three things I need to worry about, step away from the keyboard, right? It's an example of what you're saying. CIA is nailed down as this trope because 25, 30 years ago, it got baked into some training. What you need to think about are your protection objectives. And
Right.
those three are good ones, maybe. Transparency might be your number one thing. And archives and records management, you realize that without transparency, there's no point. So, right.
No, and that's important where that came from. That came from the lack of guidance. I think it might have even come from the Orange books way back when. But the idea of providing some framework for that, for cybersecurity, it was good enough at the time. And now we're talking about different frameworks. We're talking about trust frameworks now. And the idea of zero trust, it's a framework of trust, and who should have access, and also your data has certain attributes, so that if all the tokens match up, then you're able to do or not do something. And the idea of extending this trust, but that so many new concepts have come up over time. It tells me that when it comes to our discipline, it is still undefined. And what do I mean by that? In science, you have this concept of the paradigm shift that Thomas Kuhn brought out way back when. And what gets me about that is it's a circular cycle. You have normal science, where all your theories, all your rules, whatever you need to know fits within this rule set. And that's where we are on a lot of things right now. But then you have a shift, or a challenge to those rules, where it doesn't quite work. but we're making it work. We're fixing it. We're adjusting our perspective to make that work. But then it wanders, and now there's outright, let's say, anarchy. Those rules do not apply anymore, and they don't work. And then as it shifts away from there, you get a really tumultuous period, and then new science comes out of that. And you're like, what the hell am I talking about? What are you talking about? Well, I'll give you a couple of examples where people literally lost their lives over. The world is flat. And we made rules in science to align with the world is flat. And for you flat earthers out there, it's not flat. Okay. The second part,
you can see it from here,
is the universe revolves around the earth. And we explained retrograde, that planets actually go backwards. And this is how we explain it. It was science observations to fit our mental model. But then when somebody said, this isn't the case, you were literally going against the church. You were going against the establishment. These rules were there to keep things normal, keep things stable. And now you violated those rules. And you violated, in some instances, cardinal sins here. You're going against some deep entrenched beliefs. Well, it turns out that those were paradigm shifts. Those were times where the rules that we had, we made them fit the current science, and now they don't. So the question is, all the exceptions we have in cybersecurity, think of all the exceptions you, as an IT person, that you have put into a firewall. Why do you have exceptions? Well, by definition, you have exceptions because the fundamentals aren't perfect, and you're making it work by this exception. So if the fundamentals aren't correct there, then is the basics of our discipline flawed? And I think you can see by no standard cybersecurity program across the country, no standard security protocols. We have rules and stuff, but frameworks come up all the time. I mean, think of the framework that NIST put out. Think of the kill chain from Lockheed Martin. Think of the MITRE attack framework. All these different things are coming up to better help us understand and explain something that the reality is our reality hasn't changed. Our perspective of it has. So if the reality hasn't changed, what has changed, or is this just flawed the way we've been looking at it all along?
Well, I think we've been looking at it relatively well, right? And I spend a lot of my time talking with folks like you and me and my age and older, right? The people who've been doing this from the very, very beginning. And I think it gives me a lot of comfort, right? Because and you said this a number of times, that the work, we do things that work. And CIA or a framework comes out, is it right? Is it correct? Well, is it absolutely correct? Just no, we're not there yet. Is it a good, do at least those things? Absolutely, yes. Shout out to Tim Roxy, right? And the 5-step, right and left of bang. Somebody has to stand up at the whiteboard, write it down, and give somebody a framework so we can work through it. And I'll let you get one more in, but we're going along with this because it's so much fun. But right, it's fundamentals. Deal with the fundamentals you have in front of you right now. Good people have put these things together. Don't make a religion out of it. This is a moving target. Cybersecurity is not fully baked, but the future is going to arrive, and there will be functioning businesses and companies and organizations there doing things that we don't quite yet know. So keep your bloody eyes out and watch for change.
Absolutely. And when I say it's not there and the challenges, in your job, you don't have the luxury of arguing whether this is something that, we're never going to solve, we're never going to resolve, we're never going to be perfect, free of cybersecurity risks. You make do with the best tools you have, the best team you have, and you secure it the best you can. And then you find out where your weaknesses are, and you try to improve upon that. And that's, again, through processes, through technology, through organizational structure, or through people. All of those things. It's not just one. You can't throw your hands up and say, we're just not there yet. That's something we get to talk about here on Cybeats. It's not something you get to talk about in the boardroom. We get to talk about at the weekly staff call. And it's important to understand that you're in the fight today, whether you like it or not, and let others pontificate about that. Go out there and do your best.
I couldn't think of a better way to end it. Thank you, JC, for your time today, for your friendship, for all the work you've done for the industry and the country and the world. You're a good man, and proud to know you.
Hey, Chris, it was great being hosted on the Twains there, and always good to see you. I get to see you a couple times a week, sometimes on my call, sometimes on our Friday call. But whenever I do get to see you, I know it's going to be interesting one way or another.
Thank you. And thank all of you for spending time with us today. Have a good day.